Welcome to Next Femme Leaders, the podcast for conscious, ambitious women who want to make a real impact with their careers without losing themselves or their well-being in the process. I'm Isabel, your host, a leadership coach with over 13 years of corporate experience. I know how hard it is to lead in systems that were not built for us, especially if you're introvert, kind, intuitive, or spiritual. So here I will share the tools that blend the practical and the mystical, the feminine and the masculine, so that you can lead with clarity, confidence, and authenticity. If you know in your bones you're meant for much more, you are in the right place. So let's start! Hello, beautiful woman. Welcome back to the Next Femme Leaders podcast. Today we're going to talk about something I'm obsessed with. And I mean that this is not just a topic I find interesting. This is something that completely changed my life when I first understood it. It changed how I approach my career, my growth, my relationships, everything. It became a kind of life philosophy. And now it is at the core of every single thing I do as a coach. And I honestly wish I had known this earlier. Because when you understand how your brain actually works, and more importantly, how to work with it instead of against it, you become a different kind of leader. Not louder, no more aggressive, just unstoppable in a way that is completely and authentically yours. So today we're going to do two things. First, understand how the brain works. And then we will talk about how to actually reprogram it. And I promise you, this is no woo-woo, this is pure science. So let's dive into how your brain works and why it's working against you. I want you to think of your brain like the most sophisticated computer ever built. It runs on programs, and just like any computer, those programs were installed, most of them long before you had any say in the matter. When you are born, your brain is not fully operational. You come with the basics like crying, breathing, looking around, but everything else gets installed through experience, through what you see, you hear, and you live through. And every time you learn something, every time you repeat a behavior, your brain physically rewires itself, building and strengthening neural connections. The more you repeat something, the more automatically it becomes. This is what neuroscience calls neuroplasticity. And here is what it makes it even better. For decades, scientists believed that the adult brain was fixed. That once you were grown, you were set. That turned out to be completely wrong. And research over the last 50 to 60 years has shown that the adult brain is remarkably adaptable. It can form new connections, strengthen older ones, and even generate entirely new neurons, something that was once considered impossible. So your brain can change. That is not a motivational statement, that is pure biology. And it is the whole reason this conversation matters. So you're not stuck with the brain you were handed, you have the power to build a new one, and that's what reprogramming is. Now here is where it gets really important, and maybe even a little uncomfortable. So most of the programs running in your brain right now were installed between the ages of 0 and 7. In that window, your brain is in a state of almost hypnotic receptivity. This is what neuroscientists sometimes describe it as a theta state, similar to the brain activity seen during deep meditation or hypnosis. So your brain absorbs everything from your parents, your environment, your culture, and it wires all of it in as truth. Not as one possible interpretation of the world, as absolute truth. Most of these programs don't live in your conscious memory. They live in your implicit memory, the part of your brain that operates automatically below the surface. Which is why most of the time, you don't even know they are running. And it goes even deeper than your own childhood. Research in epigenetics has shown that we can inherit emotional and stress responses from our ancestors. So trauma experienced by previous generations can leave biological marks on the DNA that influence how we respond to the world, without any conscious memory of those events. So sometimes you're not just carrying your own conditioning, you're carrying generations of it. And what does it cost you as a leader? Here is what this matters so much and why I wanted to bring this conversation, specifically for you as an ambitious woman. We live in a world that has historically given women very specific messages about what they are and are not allowed to be. Be helpful, be modest, don't be too loud, too ambitious, too much. Nobody handed you a document with those rules. They came through thousands of subtle signals. Who got interrupted at the dinner table, who got praised for speaking up versus who got called difficult, the absence of women who look like you in positions of power, and your young brain absorbed all of it. Feel it away as this is how the world works. And now those programs show up in the workroom, often without you even realizing it. So the woman who was told to be quiet as a girl becomes the executive who softens her boldest ideas before she even speaks them, starting sentences with "this might be a silly question, but," or even not even mentioning them. The woman who was told she was too emotional suppresses the very intuition and emotional intelligence that are actually her greatest leadership strength. The woman who never saw anybody like her at the top struggles to picture herself there. Not because she lacks the capability, but because her brain genuinely has no reference point for it. And I lived this myself. I loved talking as a child. Genuinely, I could talk forever. But I received so many messages to be quiet, to not take up space, that over time I became shy in big groups. And it took years of conscious reprogramming to undo that. And still a process I'm doing, and that's why this podcast for me was a personal challenge as well. And I always say, the program is not your fault. But deciding to undo it, that's your responsibility. And that's the decision that changed everything. So here are the 3 mechanisms that are keeping you stuck. Once you understand where the programs come from, you need to understand how they stay in place. Because knowing that you have a limiting belief is not the same as being free of it. There are 3 specific brain mechanisms that lock these programs in, and until you understand them, you will keep hitting the same invisible walls. So the first one is your subconscious is running the show. Here is the number that stops most people. Research shows that somewhere between 90 and 95% of our daily decisions, behaviors, and emotional reactions are driven by the subconscious, not by our conscious intentions. 95%. So when you consciously want to step into the next level, negotiate that salary, put yourself forward for that role, own the room, but somehow you keep pulling back, you're not being weak or inconsistent. You're experiencing a conflict between what your conscious mind wants and what your subconscious has been programmed to do. And the subconscious almost always wins. Not because you're not smart or strong enough, but because it's faster, it never sleeps, and it can be running these programs for decades. So this is at the core of the work I do with women as an executive and leadership coach. One of my clients was searching for a new job, genuinely the next level she had been working towards. When we went through her process together, one of the first beliefs we found was, the job I want is not available to me. And until we work on that belief, she was constantly sabotaging herself without even realizing. Because think about it, how invested would you be in searching, in preparing, in showing up fully for an interview if somewhere deep inside you believe the job was not actually even available to you? Not very, right? The brain does not waste energy on things it believes are impossible. So these beliefs act as protectors. They stop us from going all in so that we never have to face the disappointment of failing. The problem is they also stop us from ever really trying. And once we dismantle that belief, everything changed. She starts showing up differently in her search, in her interviews, in how she speaks about herself, and she got the role she was looking for. The second thing you need to understand about your brain is that your brain filters reality based on what you believe. Your brain receives around 11 million bits of information per second. Your conscious mind can process about 40 of them. The structure that decides what makes the cut is called the reticular activating system, the RAS. and it filters your perception based on your beliefs. So if you carry a deep program that says opportunities are not available to someone like you, your brain will literally not see the opportunities in front of you. Not because they are not there, but because your filter has marked them as irrelevant. Think of it like the Instagram algorithm. Once Instagram figured out last year that I was getting married, it only showed me reels about weddings. And it was not that suddenly create more wedding content in the world. It's just that it decided that was what it was relevant to me and filter out everything else. Your RAS works exactly the same way. It does not change the reality. It just decides what part of reality you get to see, and it bases the decision entirely on what you already believe. And there is a fascinating research study on this. The psychologist Richard Wiseman spent years studying what separates people who consider themselves lucky from those who consider themselves unlucky. And what he found was fascinating. It was not chance, it was not circumstance, it was perception. To prove this, he ran a simple experiment. He gave two groups of people a newspaper and asked them one question. How many pictures are in it? The first group was a group that described themselves as lucky, while the second group described themselves as unlucky. Now here is the twist. On the second page of the newspaper, Wiseman had printed a message in large bold letters that took half of the page, and it read, "Stop counting. There are 43 pictures." The answer was right there. Impossible to miss, if you're looking. Do you know who saw it? The lucky group spotted almost immediately, counted to 43 and moved on. The unlucky group, most of them missed it entirely. They were so focused on counting, so locked into the task that their brain filtered out everything else, including that the answer was sitting right in front of them. Same newspaper, same page, same message printed in enormous letters. Completely different reality. Wiseman concludes with this that lucky people are not lucky because good things happen to them more. They are lucky because their mindset keeps them open. They notice more, they expect more, and then they find more. Their RAS is primed for opportunity, while the unlucky group, RAS, was primed for effort and struggle, and that's exactly what they experience. This is why mindset work is not fluff. Beliefs shape what you perceive. Perception shapes what you act on, and action shapes your results. It all really starts with the program running underneath. Change what you believe is possible, and you will literally change what you are able to see. That's not poetry, that's neuroscience. The third thing you need to understand about your brain is that your brain is wired to keep you safe, not successful. The last mechanism we will talk today is the negativity bias. So your brain has evolved over hundreds of thousands of years in environments where threats were constant and often fatal. As a result, your brain is wired to prioritize bad news over good news, threats over opportunities, loss over gain. In fact, there is loads of experiments where losing something feels roughly twice as painful as gaining something of equal value. This is called loss aversion. Your brain is always running the calculation in the background, always nudging you towards the safer choice. The problem is that your brain cannot fully distinguish between a physical threat and the psychological discomfort of asking for a promotion, launching something new, or stepping into a bigger role. It treats them the same way. It floats you with reasons to stay safe. And those reasons feel completely rational, even when they are just your ancient threat detection system protecting you from imaginary danger. Now, understanding this doesn't make the fear disappear, but it means that you stop treating the fear as evidence that you shouldn't move forward. The fear is just the program doing its job. Your job is to lead anyway. There is a concept I love from psychologist Hendricks that explains exactly why this happens. In his book, The Big Leap, Hendricks describes what he calls the upper limit problem. This is the idea that every one of us has an internal thermostat set to a certain level of success, happiness, and possibility. And when we start to exceed that level, when things are genuinely going well, but the next level is within reach, something in us pulls the temperature back down. We sabotage, we hesitate, we manufacture a crisis. We suddenly get very busy with things that do not matter. Not because we don't want to grow, but because our nervous system has a ceiling for how much good we are allowed to experience, and anything above the ceiling feels unsafe. So the next time you feel that pull to shrink, just as things are getting good, recognize it. That is your upper limit doing its job. Notice it, name it, and choose to expand anyway. That is what leading bigger actually looks in practice. So let's go into how to reprogram your brain in 4 steps. Here's what matters most. The subconscious is not reprogrammed by logic. You cannot think your way out of deep conditioning. The subconscious learns through 2 things: emotion and repetition. Keep those 2 words with you as we go through these steps. So step 1 is self-observation. We need to see the program. You cannot change what you cannot see. So the first step, and honestly the hardest, is developing the ability to observe your own automatic patterns without immediately defending them. Now the challenge is that these programs usually feel like facts. Not like stories, not like old conditioning, like absolute reality. I remember coaching an amazing woman a few years ago who was so certain her limiting beliefs were true that she genuinely couldn't accept that they were beliefs at all. One of the reasons she believed she was stuck in her job was that her company's salaries were the highest in the market. So every time she went to an interview, instead of negotiating upwards, she was asked how much less she would be willing to accept to make the move. So she had accepted that story so completely that the market paid less, that this is just reality, that it was quietly shaping every conversation she had about her own value. That is how convincing the subconscious can be. It doesn't announce itself, it just shapes everything. Because at the same time, she was feeling trapped in this job. So we worked on that belief together. A few months later, she went through an interview process where the salary offer was above market, showing that what she had spent years treating as a fact turned out to be, once again, just a belief. Now, she didn't leave her job at the end, but just proving that this was a belief allowed her not to feel trapped anymore. As I always say to my clients, it's really hard to read the label when you're inside the jar. But it is a skill you can train. And here's an exercise I use. Look at the results in your life right now, in the areas where you feel most stuck, and work backwards. Ask yourself, what beliefs would a person need to hold to produce exactly these results? You're not looking for someone to blame, you're looking for the program. And here's another one that goes even deeper. Ask yourself, what are you afraid you will lose if you actually get what you want? Because sometimes the block is not in the fear of failure, it's in the fear of what success costs. In a bigger role, you might feel more lonely, it might change your relationships, it might mean you finally have to stop playing small, and that's terrifying in its own way. One of my clients had a strong belief that growing in her career meant less time with her children. When we worked through it, she found her own way to be both ambitious and present in her family. But first we had to name the fear. That was the key. So the second step is to start challenging, questioning the story. Once you have identified a limiting belief, the next step is to actually test it. Because most of these programs feel like universal truth, and they are not. They're just repeated stories. In fact, a belief is a thought we have repeated many times. And cognitive behavioral research has consistently shown that examining the evidence for and against a belief is one of the most effective ways to loosen its grip. So ask yourself, where did this belief actually come from? What is the concrete evidence that this is true? What evidence exists that directly contradicts it? Is it a universal truth or a pattern from one context that I have overgeneralized to my whole life? Now, step 3 is reframing and installing the new program. So, challenging an old belief creates a gap, and you need to fill it deliberately with a new, more empowering story. Or otherwise, the old program will simply slide back in because the brain defaults to efficiency, and the existing pathway is always the path of least resistance. This is where affirmations come in. And yes, I know some people roll their eyes at affirmations. They were really popular a few years ago. But here is the science behind why they work when done correctly. As we mentioned before, a belief is just a thought that we have repeated so many times that we have accepted as this is true. In the same way, if you repeat a different thought enough times with enough emotional investment, you eventually start believing it. You're literally constructing a new neural pathway. So for affirmations to actually work, it's important to use present tense. I am lands completely different in the brain that I will be. It's also important to make them emotional resonant, not just intellectually plausible, because emotion is what activates deeper neural encoding. So if a statement feels too far from your current reality, it might trigger resistance, and then it creates the opposite effect. You hear yourself saying it, and it actually reinforces how untrue it feels. That's why it's important first to go through step 2, where we challenge the belief, but also a trick I share with the women I work with is to use a bridge. So instead of I'm confident to take up space, which your brain immediately rejects, you might want to say I'm learning to take up space. So same direction, same destination, but a version your brain can actually receive today. You can try I'm learning to, or I am building the capacity to, and grow from there. One exercise I love is to record your own affirmations and listen to them during your morning routine. Let your voice become the voice that reprograms you. This is super powerful. So step 4 is visualization. Make it real before it is. So the brain does not cleanly distinguish between a vividly imaged experience and a real one. This is amazing, especially at the level of emotional and psychological response. This is why elite athletes use mental rehearsal. The neural pathways activated during visualization overlap with those activated during actual performance. So for you as a leader, this means something very specific. If you have never seen anybody like you in the room you are trying to enter, in the boardroom, the C-suite, the stage, you can create that experience in your mind. With enough vividness and repetition, your subconscious begins to hold it as familiar, not threatening, not foreign. Visualization is not wishful thinking. It is deliberate experience design. What you're actually doing is you're building the internal reference point your brain needs to stop treating your next level as dangerous and start treating it as home, as safe. So these are the 4 steps. And I want to add something here that most leadership content completely ignores. And honestly, I think it's the most important pieces of the whole conversation. When women start doing this reprogramming work, something very predictable happens. They turn it into another arena for self-criticism. They spot a limiting belief and feel ashamed of it, they catch themselves self-sabotaging and use it as a proof that something is fundamentally broken in them. I was there myself as well. They try to change and do not see the results fast enough and conclude they are beyond fixing. There's no reprogramming, that is just replacing one form of self-attack with another one. So I want to share something personal here because I think a lot of you will recognize this. For years, I used to get so angry with myself after high-stakes situations. A meeting with a dominant person, a moment where I needed to speak up and I froze, a conversation where I could see clearly afterwards exactly what I should have said, and I didn't. I would replay it for hours in my head, sometimes days, telling myself I should have been smarter, sharper, braver, faster, what is wrong with me, why can't I just react differently? What I didn't understand then was that I wasn't failing in those moments. I was running a program A program installed long before that meeting, long before that conversation. One that said that in front of dominant people, you make yourself smaller. You don't challenge. You don't take up space. That program had been doing exactly what it was designed to do. And then I was punishing myself for it. That is a trap. You cannot beat yourself into reprogramming. The self-attack does not fix the program. It just adds another layer of conditioning on top of it. So here is where we need one of my favorite words and concepts, which is compassion. In particular, self-compassion. And if you want to learn more about this topic, we did a specific episode on it, episode number 11, which is called Self-Compassion, the Weapon for Progress. Dr. Kristin Neff, a psychologist at the University of Texas and one of the world's leading researchers on this, defines self-compassion as three things: treating yourself with kindness rather than judgment, recognizing the struggle is part of the shared human experience rather than a personal failure, and staying present with difficulty rather than drawing in it. I know what you might be thinking. Self-compassion sounds soft, like lowering your standards, like the opposite of the drive that got you here. But actually, the research says exactly the opposite. Neff studies consistently show that self-compassion is positively linked to motivation, resilience, and personal initiative. Self-compassionate people aim just high, but they are not destroyed when they fall short. They are more driven by genuine growth than by fear of failure. And for us women, this matters so much. We were conditioned to earn our place through relentless performance, to never appear weak, to keep pushing regardless of the cost. That conditioning is itself a program. And the antidote is not more self-criticism dressed as discipline. Self-compassion is not the absence of high standards, it's giving yourself the room to let the next level be a work in progress, using curiosity and courage to keep learning and stretching yourself. As you will often hear me say, better than perfect. And in practice, this means noticing when your inner voice is being brutal and asking yourself, would I speak to a woman I was mentoring this way? It means recognizing that struggling with deep conditioning is shared by millions of women and is not a personal failure. It's a systemic challenge. It is common humanity. And you're doing something most of the people never attempt, which is becoming intentional about who you are becoming. At the executive table, in your career, in your leadership, in your life, that deserves respect. So as we arrive to the end of this episode, I want to leave you with this. You did not choose the programs running in your subconscious. They were built by a world that had very specific ideas about what you should want, be, and accept. A world that is not even the same now as it was 30 years ago. The fact that those programs are limiting you is not a personal failure. It's a predictable outcome of how conditioning works. The brain that was shaped by the world can be reshaped by you. Not overnight, not by reading one article or listening to this episode only, but through sustained delivery, emotionally engaged practice. The kind of deep work that most people underestimate because it does not produce instant results. But the women who commit to it, who give it a real year of focus, do not just perform differently, they become different. The programs change, the default thoughts change, the automatic behaviors change, the way they walk into a room changes. And when all of that shifts, results follows. So as I always say, don't just believe me. Try it, commit for a year, and see who you can become. This is very deep work, but it's the most important work you will ever do as a leader. So a little recap before we leave. The first step to actually reprogram your brain. First, observe your programs. Second, challenge your stories. Third, reframe them with new beliefs and affirmations. And fourth, use visualization to make your next level feel familiar before you get there. As always, I would love to know what are your main insights and takeaways. And with that, I will see you in 2 weeks. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you like what you heard, let me know on Instagram at NextFemLeaders or send your thoughts and reflections to info@isabelfonseca.com. I truly would love to hear from you. And if it resonates with you, I would be so grateful if you left a review or a comment so that it helps more conscious, ambitious women to find this space. And please don't keep it for yourself, send it to another woman you know who needs to hear this message today. Keep leading with your truth and remember, you already are an ex-femme leader.